have the pleasure shortly to introduce Yana Grinshpun. She is an associate professor at the Sorbonne Nouvelle in Paris. She is a linguist, particularly interested in discourse analysis and media analysis. Yana is currently teaching on ideology of media discourse to students preparing their master's degree in language science at the Sorbonne. She's teaching in French, English, Spanish, and also fluent in Hebrew and Russian. Her research over the recent years was mainly concentrated on the functioning of the media discourse, in particular in France, of course, and on the propaganda and manipulation spread by the media in democratic societies. Two of her last papers are dedicated to the media discourse and the spread of anti-Semitism in France. And today, Yana will speak about anti-Semitism in France in general and the media. The floor is yours.
Thank you for your presentation. So we continue our travel in Europe, and now we'll speak about France. And I will present a general picture of anti-Semitism or anti-Semitic atmosphere today, taking into account the events of the last 20 years. The ancient forms of anti-Semitism, that's what we call old school anti-Semitism, such as we know them since the 19th century, have actually never disappeared in France in the Dreyfus affair, following the ebb and flow of history since then. Nevertheless, nowadays we witness the rebirth of very aggressive anti-Semitic movements that come both from the extreme right, is it okay? This kind of anti-Semitism has actually never stopped, and especially from the convergence of the anti-Semitism of the extreme left and the Islamic influence, which is very powerful in the French society. For Pierre-André Taguieff, I don't know if you know this very famous politician and philosopher who prefers to use the word judeophobia and not anti-Semitism. This new form of judeophobia dates back from 1967, the victory of Israel in the Six-Day War. It is different from the ancient forms of anti-Semitism since it is not based on the race argument and doesn't have anything to do with the conception of Semite. The new judeophobia is based upon the polemic conflation between Jews, Israelis, and Zionists. It is based on radical anti-Zionism, which consists of three levels: Arabic nationalism, Palestinian nationalism, and jihadi Islamism that reactivates ancient anti-Jewish stereotypes of the European origin, like blood libel, conspiracy, financial manipulation, media power, imperialism. It also produces new stereotypes that we've been talking about today, attributed to the Jews and Israel, like racism, like apartheid, like genocide, etc. Radical anti-Zionism has been forged within the framework of Arab-Muslim wars against Israel, borrowing stereotypes from different forms of European and anti-Semitism, and adapting it to the anti-Jewish representations in Quran and the Hadith, the commentaries of Quran. Radical anti-Zionism has come to the West, if I can say, in the bags of Palestinian propaganda, and it essentially mobilized the extreme left and the extreme right. This is, by the way, the conditional pro-Palestinianism that the contemporary renaissance of Jewish hatred has come to the West through. So my talk will be divided into two parts. I will make a very brief survey of Jewish question in France since 2000 till today, based on the works of the prominent French philosophers, historians, and discourse analysis. And then I will talk about the media itself. The actual anti-Semitic events cannot be dissociated from the subtle and sophisticated anti-Zionist campaign led by the national French media. I call anti-Semitic events those occurrences with actual physical and psychological attacks against persons of Jewish origin. I call anti-Zionist campaign the narrative constructed and broadcast by the French media since 2000. I will then explain why media plays such an important role in spreading this new wave of anti-Semitism by analyzing the last words of Mohamed Merah, the murderer of Jewish children in Toulouse in 2012. Today, France counts the biggest Jewish community of Europe. At perhaps 600,000 strong, recent estimates place it lower, the French Jewish community accounts for fully half of the Jews presently living in the European Union. This community constitutes 0.73% of the whole French population. Anti-Semitic acts have increased every year since 2000. As an example, there were 311 anti-Semitic acts in 2017, and there were 541 attested last year. The wave of anti-Semitism can be observed in France is intrinsically linked to the existence of Israel and radical anti-Zionism. Therefore, an important part of this talk will be dedicated to the discussion about the contemporary representation of Israel, Zionism, and Jews. It is probably correct to think that the outburst of anti-Semitism is noticed in France since the 2000 Gaza War, or what is called the Second Intifada. Several major events took place in France at that time. An important number of anti-Israeli or pro-Palestinian demonstrations where anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic slogans of support to Hezbollah and Hamas were heard. The year 2000 was a turnaround in the media campaign already hostile to Israel since 1982, as Leon Polakov showed it in his Essai de désinformation, and as far as I'm concerned, there is no translation of this book in English. The Second Intifada gave French media a possibility to declare a real psychological war with Israel. This assault is symbolized by so-called Al-Dura incident. Yeah, here we go. This is the whole affair or incident has been described by Taguieff in his book that wasn't translated in English, and especially chapter 4, which is, well, translated the title, the Al-Dura symbol in the media of war from manufacturing to operation. So what happened? The French channel, France 2, broadcast the supposed murder of a little Mohammed Al-Dura, a 12-year-old Palestinian kid, which took place in the Gaza Strip on the 30th of September 2000 during the Second Intifada. Jamal Al-Dura and his 2-year-old son Muhammad were filmed by Talal Abu Rahma, a Palestinian cameraman freelancing for France 2, as they were caught in crossfire between Israeli and Palestinian security forces. The footage shows the pair crouching behind a concrete cylinder, the boy crying, and the father waving, then a burst of gunfire and dust, after which the boy is seen slumped across his father's legs. The voice-off of a French journalist, Charles Anderlin, based in Jerusalem, but not present during the footage, is telling the story. Muhammad, whose name became famous within a couple of hours, becomes then a national Palestinian hero, a martyr in the battle against the Jewish occupants. Little Muhammad was hailed throughout the Muslim world as a martyr, and Israel as a killer of children. Thus, the ancient myth of Jews as murderers of innocent was revived. This incident also had a huge impact on the French society. Taguieff called it the first blood libel of the 21st century. It provoked a wave of anti-Israeli condemnations. A flurry of articles was written about the cruelty of the Jewish army and the malevolent intentions of the Israeli state. The problem is that France too has been suspected of staging the film, and the narrative presenting Israeli soldiers as professional children killers has been seriously questioned by various experts. The truth of it is still not revealed, but in France, the moral condemnation of Israel was unanimous. All the following years were assisted at the enriching of this narrative broadcast by the media with impressive regularity. Just one example to show how it works. In 2005, on the 26th of March, Euronews broadcast a TV show called No Command. I guess you probably know it. Israeli soldiers, this is a show where there is no sound, only images, and you can interpret it as you wish. Israeli soldiers are shown in front of a little boy to whom they scream something in Hebrew. Even those who understand Hebrew cannot hear the voice. The boy then takes off his pants. They continue to scream, and he takes off his shirt. Without commands and a close-up, the impression of spectators is really terrible. Again and again, they witness acts of humiliation of Palestinian children by the Israeli sadists. The problem is that on the same day, the other media explained that the child was a kamikaze wearing an explosive belt, and the soldiers were giving him precise instructions in order not to blow himself up. Daniel Dayan, a prominent French media analyst, explains that in many cases, so-called information tends to become a confirmation of a preconditional knowledge. The news becomes the very embodiment of the storytelling incorporated to the doxa. Doxa is a common knowledge. The average spectator, or reader, or listener of the French media knows only what he's shown and told by the media. He is familiar with storytelling that has been constructed for the decades by the press, radio, television, and social networks. In 2009, we go, the famous Goldstone report contributed to shaping a public opinion in France about Israel. Richard Goldstone is the former South African judge who investigated the Gaza war of 2008 and 2009 between Israel and Hamas on behalf of the United Nations. By 2007, Hamas extremists had taken control on Gaza and fired some 3,000 rockets and mortars into Israel, killing civilians, including children, and injuring hundreds of people. Israel sought a diplomatic resolution, but in December 2008, in response to condemnation of the UN Secretary General, Hamas fired yet more rockets. Israel finally responded with a military action, and it has always maintained that it was justified as an act of self-defense. Well, Goldstone accused Israel of war crimes. In 2011, in an article published in Washington Post that you have here, he regretted his biased conclusions and disclaimed what he wrote in the report. Well, but the harm was done, and Israel was called a racist state committing genocide. And that's how Dominique de Villepin, ex-prime minister of France and a prominent politician, depicted Israel in Le Figaro in 2014. Here is the extract of his speech, though. He says that it's an apartheid state. Thus, Israel is accused on the basis of rumors in this hyperbolic manner. A rumor is a sum of beliefs, convictions, or non-verified information that express certain fears shaped into narratives illustrating what the public already knows. These rumors are based on stereotypes translated into a cultural code. We're talking about cultural code on the Philip Spencer's conference. So this cultural code, well known by the public and adapted to the socio-historical context. When Israelis are massacred by Palestinians in the cruelest way, the French media almost never talk about it, or if they do, they construct the titles of the articles in a very perverse way. For instance, there was no mention about the savage death of 2 Israeli soldiers who were tortured and cut into pieces by a Palestinian mob in 2000. It was only broadcast by the television I-24 based in Jaffa. This wasn't shown in French media, and there was not a word about this lynch that happened in Ramallah. When in 2016, a young Israeli adolescent, Hallel Ariel, has been savagely murdered in her sleep by a 19-year Palestinian, the French media titled the article in a very perverse way. Here you have the, it doesn't work. This I need, it was in, translate right away in English. Well, the title of the article was Hallel Ariel has died as a victim of hatred of men. Okay? So, which may lead to various conclusions. First, that she was a misanthropist, she hated mankind, or that she was hated by human beings. The title doesn't mention the real reason, a brutal murder. The storytelling of this conflict is constructed by the media and today by certain left-wing intellectuals. It implies predefined roles. These roles are victims and persecutors, or as Bush used to say, the excess of good and the excess of evil. The Palestinians represent the absolute victim in a European narrative, and the Israelis the absolute persecutor. When the events don't fit this scheme, they disturb and confuse the narrative. Then they're silenced or presented in minimized version. As Daniel Dayan says, the ordinary French media storytelling has constructed a huge sacrificial painting with a clear religious dimension, where the figure of Palestinians is the one of Jesus, and the Jews play the role that they always had in the Christian tradition. It is not about to inform about real suffering of Palestinians, but to endow them with a sacred status, thus inventing new forms of compassion. This sacred status of people martyr gives the narrative a Christian fiber, even though the addressees of these discourses are agnostic or atheists. It's a standoff between the martyr and the torturer, Palestinians and Jews or Israelis. And if anyone in France doubts this dogma, they will be considered as pitiless and immoral, exactly as the persecutors who are condemned unanimously and accused to be the henchmen of Israel. This is how pro-Palestinianism as a belief has become a mainstream media narrative, and it can be also considered as a new moral order. The famous and influential French philosopher Gilles Deleuze didn't hesitate to speak about genocide committed by Israel. He thus compared the Jews to the Nazis by rhetoric inversion. In 2002, he published an article in La Revue d'études palestiniennes where he says, this is a genocide where the physical extermination is subordinated to geographic evacuation. Deleuze then compared the events of the Second Intifada with Oradour-sur-Glane, a French village where in 1944 the massive extermination of the inhabitants of the village by Panzerdivision Das Reich took place. In the same vein, a decade before, famous French filmmaker Jean-Luc Godard didn't hesitate, where does it, no, that probably don't have this image. Yeah, here we are. He didn't hesitate to overlap the images of Golda Meir and Adolf Hitler in his movie Ici, Ailleurs, translated into English Here and Elsewhere. Godard also liked to say, ironically, that the Jews saved Israel by dying in the camps. Fundamentally, he said, there were 6 million of kamikaze. That's how Israel and the Jews in general are intrinsically connected in the same entity in the mental representation of people. One of the main evidence of this identification is the fact that the most popular anti-Semites in France are Jews, and we were talking about that with Tammy and Philip. There are most famous of them are Ronnie Brown and Esther Ben Bassa, and so on and so on. They specialize in the legitimation of Israel, and their statements are accepted as an absolute proof of the Zionist evil because these statements come from the Jews. Now, a word about the facts, what happened in France since 2003. So there were 11 Jews killed only on the basis of their origins, without any other reason. Though in 2 cases the murderers thought the Jews equal money, so the crime was also financially motivated. First, 2003, the 23-year-old Sébastien Selam was found in the basement of the building where he lived. Having murdered the young man, the killer went to his mother's house and screamed, "I killed a Jew." He also declared to the police that he was happy to kill a Jew since he was going to paradise. The anti-Semitic motive of the murder was not taken into account before May 2018, that is to say 15 years after the murder. The killer was said to be an unbalanced person. This is the expression our media use, unbalanced person. 2006, the murder of Ilan Halimi, 23-year-old Jewish salesman in Paris. He was gruesomely tortured to death in the outskirts of the city by a gang appropriately called the Barbarians, les Barbares. Although the media, the police, and much of the public stubbornly resisted, saying the murder is an anti-Semitic act, it eventually emerged that the gang leader, Youssef Fofana, was a West African Muslim with Salafist connections. 2012, 6 years later, in Toulouse, home to 200 Jews, to a 30-year-old rabbi, his 2 small children, and an 8-year-old pupil were gunned down at the Otzar Torah school, an academy of high repute located in a region relatively free of so-called inter-community tensions. This is the usual euphemism for anti-Semitic disturbances in French media language. The 23-year-old killer, Mohamed Mirai, French citizen of Algerian descent, had been born in Toulouse, imbibed Islamist and extreme anti-Semitic attitudes at home, became further radicalized in prison as a juvenile delinquent, and subsequently trained as a jihadist in Afghanistan. 2014, Mehdi Nimouche committed the brutal killings at the Brussels Jewish Museum in May of that year. And what is quite tragical, that is one of the Nimouche 4 victims, a retired art publisher, had arrived in the Belgian capital only 2 months earlier, having left her home in France because of the anti-Semitism. Neither the murder of Ilan Halimi, for which the anti-Semitic motive wasn't at first taken into account, nor the Toulouse killings alerted mainstream French society to the gravity of growing anti-Semitism. But a wake-up call did come in the form of a mass demonstration on the January 26 in 2014, known as Le Jour de Colère, the Day of Anger. Those pro-Palestinian manifestations included groups of militants shouting slogans like "Jew, Jew, France does not belong to you. Jews, get out of France." And the first time since the Holocaust, death to the Jews. The official media preferred not to mention it, and the very left-wing daily Libération even published a couple of witnesses where it was said that the demonstration was peaceful and dignified. 2015, hostage taken in hyper-kasher shop by Amédi Koulibaly and the murder of 4 hostages because they were Jews. 2017, Sarah Halimi's murder by her Muslim neighbor. She was 65, a retired doctor, mother of 3, killed by a 27-year-old Muslim who had beaten her and then threw her out of the window, crying Allah Akbar and "I killed a shaitan," well, a Satan. 2018, I continue. Mireille Knoll murder. She was also a retired Holocaust survivor. She was murdered by her Muslim neighbor who thought she was rich, so she had a lot of money. And the police expressed doubts about the anti-Semitic character of the murder. In each case, when Jewish individuals are murdered in France, the murderers, when they do not commit a collective attack where French are involved, turn out to be mentally disturbed or unbalanced, I quote, almost all having a psychiatric past, according to the media. This reluctance to call a spade or anti-Semites anti-Semitic is explained by several factors. One of them is a false idea, according to which the Jew hatred is exclusively reserved to the far right, neo-Nazis, neo-fascists, etc., or to Catholic traditionalists. The second false idea is the making of a concept Islamophobia, widely spread by the contemporary anti-racist movement. According to the new dogma, the Islamophobia has replaced the anti-Semitism today in Europe, where anti-Semitism, as they say, does not exist anymore. A couple of weeks ago, one of the influential bloggers, Etienne Chouard, economy professor and a well-known media figure, says, there is no anti-Semitism in my country, and there are no chamber gas as well. We are currently witnessing a phenomenon of substitution expressed in a slogan-type thought popular on the left, which is, the Muslims are the Jews of today. The idea is supported by all kinds of intellectuals, historians, and philosophers. One quotation of Enzo Traverso, The End of Jewish Modernity, he writes, you have a quotation over here? Do you have? I have time, okay. Islamophobia, he says, plays a role for the new racism that anti-Semitism had in the past. The memory of the Holocaust, a historical perception of anti-Semitism through the prism of its culmination in genocides, tends to obscure these clear analogies. The portrait of the Arabs or Muslims sketched by contemporary xenophobia does not differ much from that of the Jew constructed by anti-Semitism in the early 20th century. As French blacks, Arabs, gays, and other minorities are fighting for institutional recognition of their suffering, journalists, intellectuals, and politicians began equating anti-Muslim xenophobia with anti-Semitism, if not with Holocaust. The turning point was completed when, in a sort of Orwellian inversion, the mythical Jewish lobby in France found itself accused of seeking a monopoly over public compassion for the victims of genocide. It is, in fact, a denial of the judeophobia existence. The anti-Semitism Enzo Traverso here is speaking about has transformed into the demonization of Zionism and Israel. To sum it up, there is anti-Semitism in France, but there are no anti-Semites. Okay? To name the authors of anti-Semitic attacks would mean to acknowledge the existence of Muslim anti-Semitism, and it is an embarrassment for those who claim to fight racism. The declared victims of racism, Muslims in France, cannot be persecutors according to this perverted logic. Well, I will now give a concrete example of the functioning of this discourse, which will show how these ideas are conveyed and received. The terrorists who committed murders of Jews contacted official media to justify and legitimize their acts. These young people were all French, grown up and educated in France. Three of them, Mohammed Mira, Nemouche, and Koulibaly, contacted the media before the massacre and explained the motives of their acts. Mohammed Mira has left 4 hours of recording, 183 pages of transcript published by Libération. So I have here 3 extracts. I have time to end? Okay. 5 minutes. Okay, fine. So I'm going right away to the third. It's very important, but it's a summary of everything he said. I'm giving you here a translation that I did from what was written down by Libération. So what does he say? Speaking to the representative of the elite troop, he says, "I would have never killed children if you hadn't been killing our kids. I killed Jewish kids because my little Muslim brothers and sisters are getting killed. So I knew that if I killed soldiers and Jews, the message would come across. Because if I had killed civilians, the French people would say, here is a madman from Al-Qaeda, just a terrorist. He kills civilians. Even if I do have the right to do so, the message is different. Here I killed soldiers and Jews. The Jews, they kill in Palestine. The soldiers kill in Afghanistan. No one can say anything. I kill the soldiers in France because in Afghanistan they kill my brothers. I kill Jews in France because the same Jews kill innocent people in Palestine. So I had a precise aim in choosing my victims." It's important to understand the logic of what he is saying. So I can present it as follows. First of all, he designs the couple, victim and persecutor, Jews and Palestinians. Second, he identifies himself with the victim, identification of the murderer with the designated victims. He says, my Palestinian brothers and sisters. Third, identification of the murder victims with the persecutor. The murdered children are Jewish, and the Jews kill Palestinian children. The Jewish children are thus identified to the persecutors. Fourth, absence of responsibility for the murderers. I would have never killed children if the Jews are responsible for these murders. And here is the process of inversion. The victims are responsible for what happened to them. This type of message, with its presupposition to kill the Jews because they kill in Palestine, expressed several times in the interview, is fueled by the media and by certain intellectuals and implicitly refers to these discourses. As we saw, the topic of innocent Palestinian children killed by cruel Israelis is largely present in the media mainstream discourse since 2000. Here are one example, because I don't have time, from Mediapart. Wait. Do you have it here? Just a second. Yes, here we go. So the following one. This is the recent example from a Mediapart, which is an alternative media, read by university professors, by intellectuals, all kind of artists, etc. So it's very popular on the left and especially at the university. I read the translation right away. The title of the article is Israel kills a Palestinian child every 3 days in a general indifference. And then it says, the murder and the wounding of the Palestinians by Israeli snipers during the Great March of Return are a clear expression of the will to mutilate the generation capable to pursue its anti-colonial struggle. Two phenomena exploited here: the ancient representation of the Jews killing Christian children in order to get their blood for the matzah, and the second, the extermination of Jewish children by Nazis by gassing and shooting them during the World War II. The result, the main narrative, adds to the blood libel that continued to exist the reversal of the extermination by Nazis. The perversity of this mechanism lies in the fact that through accusation of Israelis, all the Jews are targeted, and we can see this in this text from Mediapart that attributes intentional murder of Palestinian children to the Israelis. That is to say, the media attribute to Israel, people and state, a criminal character. Those who read Mein Kampf will recognize the accusation of criminal heredity of Jews developed by the Nazi ideology. Now it is used by the extreme left media, who constantly shows the repulsive figure of Israeli soldiers. And here we go. Those are the quite irregular picture that you can see in our press. The logical construction of these discourses transfers the responsibility for murderous deeds to the victims of the murder and requests empathy for the murderers. This model is transmitted by the media-dominant storytelling. The AFP, French press agency, recommends to journalists who cover the Israeli-Palestinian conflict not to use the word terrorist when speaking about Palestinians. So where is the first one? Yeah, you can't see it very well, but they say never to use this word speaking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The journalists can use the word Palestinian as a noun or as an epithet to men, women, or adolescent. When the Jews, or more rarely non-Jews, are attacked in France, in most cases, the attackers, who are almost always Muslims, are called mentally disturbed or unbalanced persons. That explains what Muhammad Mira said: if I kill Jews, the message is clearer, because if I kill civilians, I will be called a terrorist. Indeed, when attacks against Jews are committed in France, the media regularly speak about the mentally unstable persons. When the same media focus their permanent and unflagging attention to what happens in Israel, the labels change. The word mental disorder is never employed speaking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Palestinian murderers are called young Palestinians or martyrs. Sometimes some articles in the extreme left media use this term without quotation marks, as it is done by Hamas or Palestinian press. The logic of labeling is different because it follows a different argumentative scheme. The media narrative has constructed the character of a Palestinian resistant who struggles against the Jewish settlers and is innocent by nature. This myth is also spread by left anti-Zionist intellectuals whose influence is very important in the formation of intellectual elite. Alain Badiou and Eric Hazan, which they have a very big influence in France, don't hesitate to write in their book, "The hostility of these young people," I don't have a quotation here, I think, okay. Good, I can conclude. The hostility of these young people, Muslims born in France, towards the Jews is fundamentally tied to what happens in Palestine. They knew that there in Palestine, the Israeli Jews oppress the Palestinians, who these young people consider their brothers for evident historical reasons. Well, to conclude this talk, I will just show you how the media speak about Israel. You see on the right, you have terrorism, London hit and plane hard, and on the left, the Palestinian car is hit in Jerusalem. So you see the word terrorist is never just like hit like that, or the truck hits the mob and so on. To conclude this talk, I would like to insist on two major phenomena. These phenomena are linguistic and discursive work on the language. The first one, the loss of semantic precision regarding words describing Jewish history by transforming their initial meaning into something else. One could talk of semantic substitution. The words Zionism, colony, settler, Jewish settler, Israeli colony, occupied territories are used as fixed syntactic groups. They have been purged from their initial sense. The denotation has been replaced by the negative connotation. I finish now. That's how the making of an anti-Zionist storytelling incorporated very ancient stereotypes: murder of innocent children, kids in Gaza, hatred for the humankind, the communalism and the loyalty of French Jews to Israel make them suspicious in the eyes of the post-national universalists. And the second, the main discursive and rhetoric procedure, is the inversion that we talked about. The inversion consists in accusing the Zionism in the name of the Holocaust. The idea is as follows. I just make a synthesis of how it works. The Jews were designed as such by Hitler, as a people. Before the Holocaust, they were singular individuals living in different European countries. Today, they claim to have their own communal life in the state of Israel. They want to be people. That means that Hitler won. Meaning, if they identify themselves with Hitler, who made them Jewish, whereas they are just humans, refusing to be just humans without any particular national, cultural, or historical self-definition, they become the enemies of the human rights. The human rights only recognize men and not citizens or nations. Israel becomes then an obstacle to the establishment of a new international order. And to conclude, it's very difficult to fight the dominant storytelling, even if journalists, scholars, or intellectuals who contest the prevailing narrative do exist. They are constantly tagged as Zionists or Islamophobic and are not often given exposure. When it happens, their words are perceived through the predefined image of Zionists, of enemy of universalism, or activists on behalf of Israel, even when they are not Jewish. And the final word, I promise, the analysis that I have presented here is not new, absolutely not. Before Taguieff, Trigano, Sibouni, and Sarfati, those are prominent French scholars, philosophers, and discourse analysts, they were Jan Kilevich, a big, very famous Jewish French philosopher, Raymond Aron, and Léon Poliakov. New generation of researchers, linguists, and analysts observe the same phenomenon, have the impression to say always the same thing. Well, how to fight it? It's a difficult question. There is a very important site which was created by Laurent Ayem. I will show it here. That is called Info Équitable. And this is actually the only media watchdog in France that informs about the disinformation and contacts the media to point out intentional omissions, distortions of reality, and so on. Well, to a certain extent, with some colleagues, we have a blog where we also analyze the mediatic texts. But in spite of all this whistleblowing, all these works and books and articles, nothing achieved their goal, I can say, in this realistic way, which is to raise public awareness of the danger of antisemitism and its consequences for Europe. Thank you.